Procrastination and instant gratification rule me. Nothing seems to motivate me. Nothing seems to motivate me. What do I do? Well, I'm going to give you some practical advice. I would say you need a plan. Like, you need a plan, and not just a plan. You need a reason to implement the plan. You need both of those. So something motivates you. You already said instant gratification motivates you. So you'll do things for instant gratification. Now, look, instant gratification is a particular form of reward. It's called incentive reward, and it's mediated by dopaminergic circuitry, the same circuitry that mediates reward as a consequence of using drugs like cocaine or any of the drugs that people abuse. And so there are certain short-term activities that are pleasurable enough so they produce they intrinsically produce a dopamine kick. And a lot of that's instantaneous gratification, like, say, eating when you're hungry, at least the taste and flavor of the food, because there's also a satiation element that comes along with food. And so there's those pleasures that speak for themselves. When you're looking at the long run, things that are rewards that are delayed don't produce as much of a dopamine kick, so they're not as immediately gratifying, and they're not as gripping in the present. And the way that you have to overcome that is to generate a vision of, it's not a plan or a strategy. It's a philosophical vision that justifies your life in some way that you deeply believe. It has to be that. And it can't be trivial, because otherwise procrastination and instant gratification are going to rule you. So we developed this program called the Future Authoring Program, and it's part of the Self-Authoring Suite. And I'll run through it very rapidly, because even if you don't use that program, although you could, because that's what it's designed for, and I think it makes it easier, it outlines what's necessary in order to overcome the problem that you're describing. So the first question you might ask yourself is, well, what would you need to gain? And you have to have a real dialogue with yourself to understand this. You have to take yourself, warts and all, your useless, procrastinating, instant gratification seeking self, and you have to sit down and say, all right, you're talking to your inner badly behaved 6-year-old. It's like, okay, what is it that you would have to have in order to commit to something in the long run? What kind of vision of the future would justify sacrifices for you? And you might say, well, you don't know. It's like, okay, fine. That's why you have to break it down. So let me ask you some questions. So you might think, well, here's some things that people need in their life, because your life is not going to be solid, grounded, gratifying, acceptable, meaningful, relevant, and devoid of earth-shaking anxiety without managing some of these things. Most people need an intimate relationship, a long-term intimate relationship, because otherwise they get lonesome and bored and crazy. Crazy in a different way than you get if you have a long-term relationship. Worse crazy. They need friends. They need family. So that could be your birth family, your parents, your extended family, your siblings, but also children. So you need to know, well, where does that fit in your life? What's your vision for that? Do you want to get along with your parents? You want to get along with your siblings? Do you have a strategy for that? Do you want to have kids at some point? Do you want to build yourself a family? Okay. You need a job or a career. Now, a career is intrinsically meaningful and usually very demanding in terms of commitment and hours, whereas a job at least can be engaging and worthwhile. It's usually more time limited. Maybe you have more freedom outside of it, but you need a job because you need something to do, and you need some routine, and you need some financial support. And if you can have a career and that's what you want, so much the better. But at least you could have a trade, something worthwhile. Not that a trade can't be a career. And believe me, I've got nothing against trades. You need to take care of yourself mentally and physically. Like, how do you want to present yourself in the world? You want to be healthy mentally and physically so that you're like a light among men. Let's put it that way. That would be a good goal. How are you going to handle the temptations of drugs and alcohol and whatever procrastination and instant gratification are tilting you in the wrong direction? So those are, 7 things that you might consider. Sit down. Here's the question. You're taking care of yourself like you're someone you care about. You can design a future that would be good for you if you were taking care of yourself. Write for 20 minutes. You can have what you want. It's 3 years down the road. You can have whatever you want, but you have to aim for it and work for it, and you have to specify it. What is it? What do you want? What would make your life worthwhile? What would be good enough so that instant gratification would be an obstacle instead of a means for proceeding? Like, I can give you an example to some degree. You know, when I was a kid in my early 20s, I did quite a bit of drinking and partying. I came from a hard drinking background up in northern Alberta. And, you know, I was out 3 times a week, even when I was in graduate school. And I was beginning to write seriously scientific papers and also the work that became Maps of Meaning and eventually 12 Rules for Life. And it came to the point where I couldn't do both. I couldn't go out and be that social and have that much instant gratifying fun and be in good enough shape so that if I was editing something complex, I was making it better instead of worse. And I was really interested in what I was doing. I was learning a lot about the brain. I was learning a lot about alcohol and drug abuse. I was laying out the platform for the relationship between narrative and neuroscience. And it was really engrossing and engaging, but it was hard and it was long-term, you know, it was a long-term plan. Well, I had to make a choice. It was either continue the fun, which was fun. I really enjoyed it, or do this thing that I really believed was more worthwhile. And it was more worthwhile to do the more worthwhile thing, which is why I stopped with the instant gratification. Like, a lot of stopping, and this is true for most people, especially young men who tend to drink a fair bit and carouse around a lot. Most young men stop that sort of thing, at least to some degree, around 25 or 26. And the reason they do that is because they pick up other responsibilities. They get a real job that has some future, and they get a relationship that's permanent. They have a family, and they decide, well, that's more important than the procrastination and the instant gratification. Okay, so make yourself a damn plan. Make it into a strategy. You could use the future authoring program if you like. I would highly recommend that. Do it badly. You might be intimidated by it. You know, I don't know how to plan. It's like, yeah, we know you don't know how to plan. Make a bad plan. It's better than the one you've got. So do it badly, and then try and modify it as needs be, and see if that works. You need a philosophy, Cody. That's the thing. You know, you're living a shallow life. And so short-term avoidance, that's procrastination. You'll do that because you don't think it's important enough. You don't think that the negative consequences of not doing what you should do are severe enough. You're not afraid enough of it. The other thing you do in the future authoring program, by the way, is write about just exactly what kind of hell you'd be likely to descend into 3 to 5 years in the future if you let your bad habits, procrastination and instant gratification, let's say, rule you and take you out of the game completely. Because you also need to be terrified as well as hopeful about what you might do if you got your act together. You need to be terrified about where you might end up if you kept being like lazy and useless, you know, and shallow. And that none of that's good. So you need to be deeper, and you need to look deeper. You need to, Nietzsche said, he who has a why can bear any how. And you need a why. And the why is something like, well, imagine you could have a life that would be worth giving up some of the instant gratification for. Even in principle, what would that look like? So, all right.